Whispers in the Dark. Chapter 1. The First Note. Rachel Porter woke up to the sound of her alarm clock blaring. It was 6:30 a.m., and the gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds of her small apartment in Brooklyn. She rolled over, slamming her hand on the alarm to silence it. Her head was pounding from the lack of sleep. She had stayed up late working on a piece for the Daily Echo, the small newspaper where she had been a reporter for the last 3 years. Rachel swung her legs over the side of the bed and rubbed her eyes. She needed coffee, lots of it. The coffee machine in her kitchen sputtered and groaned as she prepared her morning cup. As the aroma filled the tiny space, Rachel glanced at her phone, sitting face down on the kitchen counter. She picked it up and noticed a notification, a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could this be? She wondered as she opened the message. It read, "You're not who you think you are. Find the truth." Rachel's heart pounded harder. Her fingers trembled as she reread the words. Was this some kind of joke? She looked around her empty apartment, suddenly feeling very alone. She typed a quick reply, "Who is this?" but received no response. A sense of unease settled in her stomach. Rachel tried to shake off the feeling as she dressed for work. She convinced herself that it was probably just a prank or a wrong number. But as she rode the subway into Manhattan, she couldn't stop thinking about the message. What truth? And why her? When she arrived at the bustling newsroom, she was greeted by the usual chaotic energy. Phones rang off the hook, reporters huddled around their desks, and the clacking of keyboards filled the air. Rachel's editor, Tom, waved her over. "Rachel, I need that piece on the mayor's scandal by noon," Tom barked, barely looking up from his computer screen. "I'm on it," she replied, forcing herself to focus. She had always been good at compartmentalizing, but today her mind kept drifting back to the mysterious message. She sat down at her desk, staring blankly at her computer. Hours passed, and she struggled to write a single paragraph. Finally, she decided to take a break. She stepped outside for some fresh air, leaning against the building and closing her eyes, trying to clear her mind. When she opened them again, she saw a man across the street, staring directly at her. He was wearing a dark coat, his face partially hidden under a baseball cap. A shiver ran down her spine. As soon as she met his gaze, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Rachel's instincts kicked in. She was a journalist, after all. She pushed off the wall and hurried across the street, following the man. He moved quickly, weaving through the throng of people. Rachel struggled to keep up, but she wasn't about to let him get away. Whoever he was, he might know something about the message. She rounded a corner and saw him slip into an alley. She paused, her breath coming in short gasps. This was crazy. She should call the police. But her curiosity got the better of her. She crept into the alley, her footsteps quiet on the damp pavement. The alley was dark and narrow, lined with dumpsters and debris. She saw the man's silhouette at the end, standing still. She approached cautiously, her heart racing. "Hey!" she called out. "Who are you? Why are you following me?" The man turned slowly, and for a brief moment Rachel saw his face. A face she recognized all too well. Then, before she could react, he bolted through a side door, slamming it shut behind him. Rachel stood frozen, her mind reeling. She knew that face. It was impossible, but it was true. It was the face of her brother, Peter, who had been missing for over a year. Chapter 2. The Lost Brother. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She stood staring at the closed door where Peter had just disappeared. A wave of emotions crashed over her. Shock, disbelief, confusion. She hadn't seen her brother in over a year. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. And now, here he was, slipping away from her again like a ghost. She hesitated for a moment, then sprinted to the door and yanked it open. Inside was a narrow stairwell leading down into darkness. She heard footsteps echoing below. Rachel didn't think twice. She plunged into the stairwell, gripping the railing as she descended quickly, her footsteps pounding on the metal steps. "Peter!" she called, her voice echoing in the confined space. "Peter, wait!" But there was no answer. She reached the bottom of the stairs and found herself in a dimly lit basement. It was damp and smelled of mildew. Boxes and broken furniture were scattered everywhere, casting long, eerie shadows in the flickering light. She scanned the room frantically, looking for any sign of her brother. Suddenly, she heard a noise, a faint rustling from behind a stack of crates. She crept closer, her heart thudding in her chest. She peered around the crates and saw a figure crouched in the shadows. "Peter?" she whispered, stepping forward. The figure bolted upright, knocking over the crates in his haste. Rachel caught a glimpse of her brother's face, pale and haunted, his eyes wide with fear, before he turned and fled through a door on the far side of the room. "Wait!" she shouted, chasing after him. She burst through the door into a long, dark corridor. Her footsteps echoed off the walls as she ran, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She could see Peter up ahead, his silhouette barely visible in the darkness. "Peter, please!" she cried. "It's me, Rachel. What's going on?" But Peter didn't slow down. He disappeared around a corner, and Rachel pushed herself to run faster. When she rounded the corner, she found herself in a dead end. Her brother was gone. She stopped, gasping for breath, her mind racing. Where had he gone? How could he have vanished so quickly? Then she noticed a small door to her left, slightly ajar. She approached it cautiously and pushed it open, revealing a small, cluttered room. It was filled with old papers, maps, and photographs pinned to the walls. In the center of the room was a large table covered in more papers and a small lamp that cast a dim light. Rachel stepped inside, her eyes scanning the walls. The photographs were of various people, places, and events. Some were familiar old family photos of her, Peter, and their parents. Others were completely foreign to her. She moved closer to the table and noticed a handwritten note lying among the papers. She picked it up and read it. "You're closer than you think, but the truth comes at a price." Rachel's hands shook as she read the words. She glanced around the room, trying to make sense of it all. Who was behind this? And why were they targeting her and her brother? As she looked over the papers again, she noticed a map with a location circled in red. The address was in Queens, not far from where she grew up. Her heart sank as she realized it was their childhood home. The house they had left behind after their parents died in a car accident when she was 17 and Peter was just a boy. She folded the note and stuffed it into her pocket, her mind spinning with questions. Why was their old house important? And what did it have to do with Peter's disappearance? Rachel knew she had to find out. She glanced around the room one last time, searching for any other clues, then turned and hurried back up the stairs, her resolve strengthening with each step. She didn't know what she would find at the old house, but she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. When she emerged from the basement into the bright light of the alley, she blinked against the sudden glare. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed her friend and fellow reporter, Lisa, who picked up after the first ring. "Lisa, I need a favor," Rachel said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Anything. What's up?" Lisa replied, her tone concerned. "I need you to meet me in Queens. I'll send you the address. It's important. And, Lisa, bring your camera. We might be onto something big." As she hung up and sent the address to Lisa, Rachel felt a mix of dread and anticipation. She was on the trail of something, but she had no idea where it would lead. All she knew was that Peter was alive and out there somewhere, and she was going to find him. Whatever secrets were hiding in the dark, she was ready to face them head-on. What's waiting at their childhood home? Subscribe and share to find out what secrets Rachel uncovers next. Chapter 3. The Childhood Home. Rachel stood in front of the house she once called home, staring up at the dilapidated facade. It was almost exactly as she remembered it. The peeling paint, the creaky front porch, the overgrown bushes lining the path to the front door. But now it felt different. It was a relic of her past, abandoned and eerie in its silence. Memories flooded back to her. Days playing in the yard with Peter, nights huddled in front of the TV with their parents. But those days were long gone. She glanced at her phone. Lisa had texted her just a few minutes ago, saying she was on her way. Rachel couldn't wait. The need for answers gnawed at her insides, pulling her toward the door. She reached into her bag and pulled out the old key she had kept all these years, its metal cool against her palm. She hadn't thought about this house in a long time, and now it seemed to hold all the secrets she was desperate to uncover. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click, and Rachel pushed the door open, stepping into the darkened hallway. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust and time. She hesitated, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Her footsteps echoed as she walked across the worn wooden floorboards, each step bringing back memories she had tried to forget. She moved through the house cautiously, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the dirty windows. The furniture was covered with white sheets, giving the room a ghostly appearance. Everything seemed frozen in time, just as they had left it after their parents' accident. Rachel's heart ached as she moved deeper into the house, passing the living room, the kitchen, and finally, stopping in front of Peter's old bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and Rachel pushed it open gently. The room was small, with a single bed against one wall and a bookshelf filled with old toys and books. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of her brother. She felt a pang of sadness as she remembered how much Peter had loved this room, his little sanctuary from the world. Suddenly, her eyes were drawn to the far corner of the room, where a small desk sat covered in papers and notebooks. She walked over and picked up a notebook, flipping through the pages. It was filled with Peter's handwriting, drawings, notes, scribbles. But something caught her eye, a page with the same handwriting as the note she had found earlier. Her heart pounded as she read the words. "I know you're looking for me. Be careful, Rachel. They're watching you too." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. They? Who were they? And how did Peter know she would come here? She flipped through the notebook frantically, searching for more clues. Her fingers trembled as she turned each page, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain what was happening. Then she heard a noise, a soft creak coming from the hallway. She froze, her heart racing. She slowly put the notebook down and moved toward the door, straining to hear. There it was again, a faint rustling, like footsteps on the old wooden floorboards. Rachel's mind raced. Was it Peter or someone else? She reached for her phone to call Lisa, but then stopped. If someone was here, she didn't want to alert them. She needed to see who it was. She moved silently to the doorway, peeking out into the dim hallway. Her eyes widened when she saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hall, just standing there, watching her. She couldn't see their face, but she knew they were looking directly at her. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. The figure didn't move. Rachel's mind screamed for her to run, to get out of there, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. She needed to know who it was. "Peter?" She tried again, taking a tentative step forward. The figure turned abruptly and disappeared around the corner. Rachel's instincts kicked in, and she dashed down the hallway after them. She rounded the corner just in time to see the front door slam shut. She sprinted to the door, flinging it open and rushing outside. She scanned the street but saw no one. The neighborhood was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. Whoever had been in the house was gone, but Rachel had a feeling they would be back, and she needed to be ready. Just then, she heard a car pull up behind her. She turned to see Lisa getting out of her car, camera in hand. "Rachel, what's going on?" Lisa asked, concern etched on her face as she approached. "I don't know yet," Rachel replied, her voice shaky. "But someone was just here. I think it might have been Peter." Lisa's eyes widened. "Your brother? But I thought—" "I know," Rachel interrupted. "I thought he was gone too. But I've seen him, Lisa, twice now. And there's something he wants me to find here. Something about our past, about this house. Lisa nodded, her reporter's instincts kicking in. Okay, let's go back in and look around. Maybe we can find some clues. As they re-entered the house, Rachel felt a renewed sense of determination. Whatever secrets this house held, she was going to uncover them. She had to find Peter. She had to know the truth. And she was willing to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The mystery deepens. Want to see what secrets Rachel and Lisa uncover next? Subscribe and share to keep up with the suspense. Chapter 4. The Hidden Room. Rachel and Lisa moved cautiously through the old house, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The house seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation and the dust of years past. Every corner they turned felt like a step deeper into the unknown. What exactly are we looking for? Lisa asked in a hushed tone, her camera hanging loosely around her neck. She had seen Rachel like this before. Intense, determined, and driven by a gut instinct that was rarely wrong. Anything that might tell us where Peter went or why he's been hiding, Rachel replied, her eyes scanning the rooms for clues. There's something here. I just know it. This house holds the answers. They reached the end of the hallway, where a small door led down into the basement. Rachel hesitated. The basement had always scared her as a child. It was dark, cold, and filled with shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking. She swallowed hard, pushing the memories aside. Let's check down there, she said, pulling out her phone and turning on the flashlight. Lisa nodded and followed, switching on her camera to record whatever they might find. The stairs creaked under their weight as they descended into the darkness. The basement was just as she remembered, cramped, cluttered with old furniture and boxes piled high. Rachel shone her light around, sweeping the beam over dusty shelves and forgotten relics of their childhood. Looks like nobody's been down here in years, Lisa muttered, stepping carefully around a stack of old newspapers. Rachel was about to agree when something caught her eye, a section of the far wall that didn't look quite right. She moved closer, her flashlight illuminating a large, faded tapestry hanging on the wall. It was an odd decoration for a basement and completely out of place among the forgotten junk. She reached out and touched the fabric. It felt heavier than it should have been, as if something was hidden behind it. "Help me with this," she said, motioning for Lisa to join her. Together, they pulled the tapestry down, revealing a wooden door set into the concrete wall. It was small, barely noticeable, and had no handle, only a keyhole. Rachel's pulse quickened. She had no memory of this door ever being here. "Do you think Peter could have gone in there?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. Rachel nodded, already reaching for the old key in her pocket, the one she had used to open the front door. She slid it into the lock and turned it. There was a soft click, and the door swung open with a low groan. Behind the door was a narrow passageway, barely wide enough for them to walk through side by side. The air was even colder here, and a damp, musty smell filled their noses. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, with Lisa following close behind. They walked in silence, the beam of Rachel's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The passageway seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning as if it were leading them deep beneath the house. Just as Rachel began to wonder if it would ever end, they came to a large wooden door, much older and more ornate than the last. "Where does this lead?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their breathing. "I don't know," Rachel replied, reaching for the door handle, "but I think we're about to find out." The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books and papers, and a single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a faint yellow glow. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, covered with more papers, maps, and photographs, much like the ones Rachel had seen in the basement of the building where she had first spotted Peter. Rachel stepped inside, her eyes darting around the room. She moved to the table and began sifting through the papers, searching for anything that might explain what this place was and why Peter had been here. Lisa joined her, capturing the scene with her camera. "Look at this," Rachel said, holding up a photograph. It was a picture of her family, taken years ago at a beach. She remembered that day, the last vacation they had taken before their parents died. But there was something strange about the photo. Behind them, in the shadows, was a figure. Unrecognizable, but unmistakably there, watching them. "What the hell?" Lisa muttered, peering over her shoulder. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. She flipped through more photos, all of them showing similar scenes from her past. In every one, there was a shadowy figure lurking in the background. "These aren't just photos," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're surveillance. Someone's been watching us. For years." Lisa looked at her, eyes wide. "But why? And who?" Before Rachel could respond, she noticed something else. A small, leather-bound journal tucked among the papers. She picked it up and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Peter's. Rachel read aloud. "I've been looking for the truth, but it's not what I expected. I'm sorry, Rachel. I had to protect you. They know everything. They've always known." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. Who is they? What did Peter find out? Lisa shook her head, speechless. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in around them. Rachel turned another page and gasped. It was a list of names. People she didn't recognize, but one stood out, Rachel Porter. "They've been watching me too," Rachel whispered, her mind racing with possibilities. But why? Just then, the light bulb above them flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. A low hum filled the room, growing louder by the second. "We need to get out of here," Lisa said, panic creeping into her voice. Rachel nodded, shoving the journal into her bag. As they turned to leave, the door they had entered through slammed shut with a deafening bang. They ran to it, pushing and pulling, but it wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," Lisa cried, banging on the door. Rachel felt a surge of fear, but she pushed it down. They had come this far. She wasn't about to give up now. She turned back to the table, scanning the room for another way out, when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small vent in the corner of the ceiling, just big enough for them to crawl through. "There," she pointed. "Help me move this table under the vent." They quickly pushed the table beneath the vent and climbed up. Rachel unscrewed the cover and hoisted herself inside, followed by Lisa. The metal was cold against her hands and knees as she crawled through the narrow space. The humming sound grew fainter, and she felt a rush of relief. But that relief was short-lived. She could hear footsteps below them, moving closer, echoing up through the vent. Someone was in the hidden room, and they were looking for them. Rachel quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her ears. "We need to move faster," she whispered over her shoulder to Lisa. "Whoever they are, they're right behind us." As they crawled deeper into the darkness, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the shadows themselves were alive and knew every move they made. Can Rachel and Lisa escape the trap? Subscribe and share to find out who's hunting them down in the darkness. Chapter 5. The Pursuit. Rachel's breath was coming in short, shallow gasps as she crawled through the tight, metallic vent, the darkness pressing in around her. Lisa was close behind, her breathing just as ragged, the sound of their movements echoing in the confined space. The dim light from Rachel's phone barely illuminated the path ahead, casting flickering shadows that danced across the cold metal walls. "Do you hear that?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel paused, listening intently. The footsteps below had grown louder, more deliberate. Whoever was down there wasn't just searching, they were chasing. "Yes," Rachel whispered back, urgency tightening her throat. "We need to keep moving." They crawled faster, their elbows and knees scraping against the metal as they hurried through the vent. Rachel's mind raced. Who were these people? Why had they been watching her and Peter? The questions burned in her mind, but there was no time for answers now. All that mattered was getting out of there alive. The vent took a sharp turn, and Rachel nearly slipped, her hands catching the edge just in time. She took a steadying breath and continued, her muscles aching from the exertion. She could feel the air getting cooler, which meant they were getting closer to an exit. But how much time did they have? Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the vent, followed by a shout. Rachel glanced back at Lisa, who was wide-eyed with fear. "They're trying to get into the vent," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the thudding noises behind them. Rachel's heart lurched. "Come on, we're almost there," she urged, pushing herself to move faster. She could see a faint light up ahead, a small square opening that seemed to lead outside. Hope surged through her, fueling her tired limbs. As they neared the exit, Rachel could feel the cold, fresh air seeping in. She reached the opening and peered out, seeing a narrow alley below. It was a long drop, but there was a fire escape just a few feet away. She took a deep breath and turned to Lisa. "We have to jump," Rachel said. "It's the only way out." Lisa's face was pale, but she nodded. "Okay, you go first." Rachel didn't hesitate. She braced herself against the edge of the vent and swung her legs out, letting herself dangle for a moment before she released her grip. She fell hard onto the metal fire escape, the impact jarring her bones, but she managed to stay upright. "Come on, Lisa," she called, motioning for her friend to follow. Lisa hesitated for just a second, then followed suit, dropping down beside Rachel. They both scrambled to their feet and looked around. The alley was empty, but they could hear the sounds of the city just a few blocks away. They needed to put as much distance between themselves and the house as possible. "This way," Rachel said, leading the way down the fire escape. They descended quickly, the metal steps clanging beneath their feet. When they reached the bottom, they took off running, weaving through the maze of alleys that crisscrossed the old neighborhood. Rachel's lungs burned with every breath, but she kept pushing forward, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She glanced back to see Lisa right behind her, determination etched on her face despite the fear in her eyes. They emerged onto a side street, the noise of traffic and pedestrians a welcome sound. Rachel slowed to a jog, trying to blend in with the crowd. She pulled out her phone and checked the signal. She had bars. Relief washed over her. She dialed the only number she could think of. "Tom, it's Rachel," she said when her editor picked up. "I need your help. I'm in trouble. It's about Peter." "What?" Rachel, slow down. "Where are you?" Tom's voice was a mix of confusion and concern. "I don't have time to explain everything right now. I'm near the old neighborhood in Queens. Can you meet me? I think someone's following us." Yeah, of course," Tom replied, his tone serious. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Just stay safe. All right?" Rachel hung up and turned to Lisa. "We need to find a place to hide until Tom gets here." Lisa nodded, scanning the street. "There's a diner up ahead. We can lay low there for a bit." They hurried to the diner, slipping inside and taking a booth near the back. Rachel's heart was still racing, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. Lisa was visibly shaken, but she managed a small smile. "Nice to know this place hasn't changed," she said, trying to lighten the mood. Rachel nodded, her eyes fixed on the window, watching for any sign of danger. "I just can't believe all this. Peter being alive, those people watching us. It doesn't make any sense." Lisa reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Rachel's. "We'll figure it out. We just need to stay calm and wait for Tom. Maybe he can help us make sense of all this." Rachel nodded, but her mind was still racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time, that whoever was chasing them was getting closer. She glanced around the diner, her gaze settling on the back entrance. It was dark and unmarked, an easy escape route if they needed one. As she turned back to face the front door, she saw them. Two men in dark coats, standing just outside, scanning the diner's interior with cold, calculating eyes. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. They had found them. "Lisa, we need to go. Now," Rachel whispered urgently, her eyes never leaving the men at the entrance. Lisa followed her gaze and went pale. "What do we do?" Rachel thought quickly. "Out the back," she said, sliding out of the booth and motioning for Lisa to follow. They moved swiftly but calmly, trying not to draw attention to themselves. As they neared the back exit, Rachel could hear the door at the front of the diner open, the bell chiming as the men stepped inside. "Stay close," Rachel whispered, pushing the door open and slipping out into the alley behind the diner. The alley was dark, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp at the far end. They sprinted towards it, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. They could hear the men's voices behind them, shouting something they couldn't quite make out. Rachel's mind raced. They needed to lose them, but how? The alley branched off into two paths up ahead. Without hesitation, she took the left path, hoping it would lead them away from the main street. They ran through the twisting alleyways, turning corner after corner until Rachel was sure they had lost them. She slowed to a stop, pressing her back against a brick wall, her chest heaving. Lisa stopped beside her, panting heavily. I think we lost them," Rachel said between breaths, though she wasn't entirely sure. Lisa nodded, looking around nervously. "We can't keep running like this, Rachel. We need a plan." Rachel knew she was right. They couldn't keep running forever. But until Tom arrived, all they could do was stay hidden and hope that they could outlast whoever was hunting them. For now, that would have to be enough. The chase is on. What will happen next? Subscribe and share to stay on the edge of your seat with this thrilling mystery. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. Rachel and Lisa crouched in the shadows of the narrow alley, their backs pressed against the cold, damp brick wall. The distant sound of the men's footsteps echoed through the twisting pathways, growing fainter with each passing second. Rachel strained to listen, her breath held tight in her chest. She needed to be sure they were alone before making their next move. "Do you think we lost them?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city. Rachel nodded cautiously, but her nerves were on edge. "I think so, for now, but we can't stay here. We need to keep moving and find a place to hide until Tom arrives." Lisa swallowed hard, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Okay, lead the way." They slipped through the maze of alleys, moving quickly but carefully, always staying close to the walls and out of sight. Rachel's mind raced with questions and fears. Why had Peter been hiding? What did he know about these people who were now chasing them? And how much danger were they truly in? As they turned another corner, they found themselves in a small, deserted courtyard. The high brick walls on all sides made it feel like a trap, but it also seemed like the perfect place to catch their breath and regroup. "We can stay here for a minute," Rachel said, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of movement. "But just a minute. We can't afford to stay in one place too long." Lisa nodded, leaning against the wall and trying to steady her breathing. "What do you think they want?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I mean, who are these guys?" Rachel shook her head, frustration gnawing at her. "I don't know, but they're dangerous, that's for sure. And they know something about Peter, something they don't want us to find out." Lisa frowned, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Then we need to find out what that is, whatever it takes." Rachel nodded, grateful for Lisa's courage. They had been through a lot together, but this was something else entirely. This was a fight for survival. Just then, the sound of footsteps shattered the quiet of the courtyard. Rachel froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She motioned for Lisa to stay quiet, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, and soon, two figures emerged from the alleyway they had just come through. The same men from the diner, their faces stern and focused. They moved with purpose, scanning the courtyard carefully, their eyes searching every dark corner. Rachel held her breath, praying they wouldn't see them. She could feel Lisa tense beside her, ready to run at a moment's notice. But running now would only give them away. They had to stay hidden, stay silent. One of the men turned toward their hiding spot, his gaze lingering on the shadows where they crouched. Rachel's heart pounded so hard she feared he might hear it. She pressed herself flat against the wall, willing herself to disappear. Then, as if some silent signal had passed between them, the men turned and continued walking, disappearing into another alley on the far side of the courtyard. Rachel waited, counting the seconds in her head until she was sure they were gone. When she finally let out her breath, it came out in a shaky exhale. "That was too close," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Lisa nodded, her eyes still wide with fear. "We need to get out of here. Now." Rachel agreed. They couldn't afford to be caught in this dead end if the men decided to come back. She peered around the corner, making sure the coast was clear before motioning for Lisa to follow. They made their way back through the alleys, moving as quietly as they could. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound a potential danger. Rachel's mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. They needed to get to a safe place, somewhere the men couldn't find them. But where? Then she remembered the journal, the last entry she had read before they were interrupted. Peter had mentioned a safe place, a place where he had hidden something important, something that could explain everything. "We need to find that safe place Peter mentioned," Rachel said suddenly, her voice firm with resolve. "It's our only chance to figure out what's really going on." Lisa nodded. "But how do we find it? Where would Peter hide something like that?" Rachel thought for a moment, then remembered something from the journal. An address scrawled hastily in the margins, almost as if Peter had written it in a hurry. It wasn't far from here, just a few blocks away. "I think I know where," Rachel said, pulling out her phone and quickly typing the address into a map app. "Come on, it's this way." They hurried through the streets, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. The city was beginning to quiet down as night fell, and the streets were less crowded. But Rachel knew that didn't mean they were safe. The men could be anywhere, watching, waiting. They reached the address in a matter of minutes. A small, unremarkable building that looked abandoned. Rachel's heart sank. This didn't look like a safe place at all. But Peter had been here, she was sure of it. "This is it," Rachel said, stopping in front of the building. "Peter's safe place." Lisa looked skeptical but nodded. "All right, let's check it out." They approached the door, and Rachel tried the handle. It was unlocked. She pushed it open, revealing a dark, narrow hallway that smelled of mold and dust. They stepped inside, and Rachel pulled out her phone, using the flashlight to guide their way. The hallway led to a small room at the back of the building. It was empty, except for a few broken pieces of furniture and a large metal filing cabinet pushed up against the far wall. Rachel's heart pounded as she approached the cabinet, her fingers trembling as she reached for the handle. She pulled it open, revealing a stack of old files and papers. She rifled through them quickly, her breath catching in her throat as she found what she was looking for. A thick envelope with her name scrawled across the front in Peter's handwriting. "This is it," she said, pulling the envelope out and tearing it open. Inside was a collection of papers, photographs, and a small handwritten note. Rachel unfolded the note and began to read, her eyes widening with every word. "Rachel, if you're reading this, it means you've found the safe place. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything sooner. I had to keep you safe. They're watching us, always watching. The truth is more dangerous than you know. But you need to know it. Keep these documents safe. They contain everything. And whatever you do, trust no one. Peter." Rachel's mind raced as she looked through the documents. They were filled with information about a secret organization, one that had been monitoring her family for years. There were pictures, surveillance notes, and a list of names. Her name, Peter's name, their parents, and more. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered, looking over Rachel's shoulder. This is insane. What is this?" Rachel shook her head, her hands trembling. "I don't know. But Peter was right. This is big. And it's dangerous." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway behind them. Rachel's head snapped up, fear gripping her heart. They had been found. "We have to go," Rachel said urgently, shoving the papers back into the envelope and tucking it into her jacket. "Now!" They turned to run, but it was too late. The men from the diner stepped into the room, blocking their path. Rachel and Lisa froze, their eyes darting around for another way out, but there was none. One of the men stepped forward, his face cold and unyielding. "You shouldn't have come here, Rachel. You don't know what you're dealing with." Rachel swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" The man's expression didn't change. "We're here to protect you, to protect everyone. But you've been asking too many questions. It's time for you to come with us." Rachel's mind raced. She needed to stall to think of a way out. "And if we refuse?" she challenged, taking a step back. The man reached into his coat, pulling out a small, black device. He pressed a button, and Rachel felt a sharp pain in her neck. Her vision blurred, and the world tilted on its axis. Lisa's scream was the last thing she heard before everything went dark. The truth is out, but at what cost? Subscribe and share to find out what happens next in this gripping mystery. Chapter 7. Into the Unknown. Rachel woke up to a blinding white light above her, its harsh glare piercing through her closed eyelids. Her head throbbed with pain, and she felt disoriented, as if she had been ripped from a nightmare into another. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, almost unresponsive. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the light until her vision adjusted. She was lying on a cot in a small, sterile room with plain white walls. There was a camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. A single door stood at the far end of the room, locked with a heavy steel bolt. Panic surged through her veins as she struggled to sit up, her heart pounding in her chest. "Lisa," she called out, her voice hoarse and weak. "Lisa, are you here?" There was no response. Rachel tried to stand, but her legs wobbled beneath her, barely able to support her weight. She leaned against the wall, steadying herself, her mind racing with fear and confusion. What had happened? Where was Lisa? And who were those men? She thought back to the moments before she blacked out. The men confronting them in the room, the sharp pain in her neck, and then nothing. Her memory was a blur. She reached up and touched her neck, feeling a small, tender spot where the pain had been. A tranquilizer, she realized. They had drugged her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might help her escape. The room was bare, empty except for the cot she had woken up on. She moved to the door and tested the handle, but it was locked tight. She slammed her fist against it in frustration, her mind racing with desperate thoughts. "Let me out!" she shouted, pounding on the door with both hands. "I know you're watching. Let me out." For a moment there was silence. Then the door clicked, and the bolt slid open. Rachel stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest. The door opened slowly, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and thin, dressed in a plain gray suit, his expression calm and controlled. "Good morning, Rachel," he said in a low, even tone. "I see you're awake. Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice shaky but defiant. "Where am I? What do you want from me?" The man smiled faintly, as if amused by her questions. "You're safe, Rachel. That's all you need to know for now. We're here to help you, to help all of you." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Help me? Is that what you call drugging and kidnapping someone?" The man's smile didn't waver. "Sometimes, measures must be taken to ensure safety. You've been asking too many questions, looking into things that don't concern you. We're here to protect you from yourself." "Protect me?" Rachel scoffed, anger flaring inside her. "From what?" "My own brother." The man's expression darkened slightly. "Your brother is involved in matters far beyond your understanding. He's put you at risk whether he intended to or not. We're here to ensure that no harm comes to you." Rachel's mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information she had. "What matters? What is this all about? Tell me." The man sighed, as if speaking to a child who couldn't grasp a simple concept. "You'll learn in time. For now, just know that you're in good hands. You'll be reunited with your friend shortly, once we're sure you're both safe." Rachel's frustration boiled over. She had to find a way out of here, to find Peter and uncover the truth about what was happening. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I need to see my friend. Now." The man regarded her for a moment, his eyes cold and calculating. "Very well," he said finally. "Follow me." Rachel hesitated but knew she had no other choice. She followed the man out of the room and down a long, narrow corridor. The walls were stark and bare, the floor cold beneath her feet. She glanced around, looking for any exits, any signs of where they might be. They reached another door at the end of the corridor, and the man opened it, revealing a small room similar to the one Rachel had woken up in. Lisa was inside, sitting on the edge of a cot, looking dazed and confused. "Lisa!" Rachel cried, rushing to her friend's side. Lisa looked up, her eyes widening with relief. "Rachel! Thank God! I thought We're okay," Rachel interrupted, squeezing her friend's hand. "We're going to get out of here, I promise." The man in the gray suit stood by the door, watching them with a detached interest. "You'll be staying here for now until we decide what to do next. Make yourselves comfortable." With that, he turned and left the room, locking the door behind him. Rachel and Lisa exchanged a glance, both of them feeling the weight of their situation settle in. "What do we do now?" Lisa whispered, her voice shaking. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "We need to find a way out of here. There has to be a way." They began searching the room, looking for anything that might help them escape. But the room was as bare as the first, with nothing but the cot and the camera in the corner. Rachel's frustration grew, her mind racing with fear and anger. "We can't just sit here and wait," she said, pacing back and forth. "There has to be something we can do." Lisa nodded, though she looked just as lost as Rachel felt. "Do you think Peter is here? Do you think he knows we're in trouble?" Rachel's heart ached at the thought of her brother, out there somewhere, possibly in danger. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have to believe he's trying to help us, that he's still out there, looking for us." Just then, a soft click echoed through the room. Rachel turned to see the camera's red light blinking faster, as if someone was watching them more intently. She felt a chill run down her spine. "Lisa," she whispered, moving closer to her friend. "I think they're watching us. We need to be careful." Lisa nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. They had to be smart, careful. There was no telling what these people wanted or what they were capable of. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "We'll find a way out," she said, more to convince herself than Lisa. "We have to." Hours passed, the minutes dragging by in silence. Rachel's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and fears, her body tense with the need to act, to fight. She couldn't just sit here and do nothing. Finally, she turned to Lisa. "We need a distraction," she said, her voice low and determined. "Something to get them to open the door again." Lisa frowned, but then her eyes widened with understanding. "You mean like pretend to be sick or something?" Rachel nodded. "Exactly. If we can get them to open the door, we might have a chance to make a run for it." Lisa took a deep breath, nodding. "Okay, let's do it." Rachel quickly lay down on the cot, clutching her stomach and groaning loudly. "Help! Someone, please help!" she cried, her voice filled with desperation. Lisa backed away, playing her part. "What's wrong with her? She's in pain. Someone help!" The door burst open moments later, and two men rushed in, their expressions serious and focused. As they moved toward Rachel, she sprang into action, kicking out at one of the men and knocking him off balance. Lisa lunged at the other, grabbing his arm and twisting it hard. "Run!" Rachel shouted, pushing past the stunned guards and darting into the hallway. Lisa was right behind her, and they sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps echoing off the walls. They didn't know where they were going, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting out, finding Peter, and uncovering the truth. The hallway twisted and turned, but Rachel kept moving, adrenaline propelling her forward. She could hear shouts behind them, the guards giving chase. But she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. They rounded a corner and saw a door at the end of the hall. Rachel's heart leapt with hope. Could this be their way out? She reached the door and threw it open, only to find herself staring at a familiar face. "Peter." "Rachel." Peter's voice was filled with shock and relief. "What are you doing here?" Before Rachel could answer, the guards caught up, blocking their escape. Peter grabbed her arm, pulling her through the door and slamming it shut behind them. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. "Now." Rachel nodded, her mind reeling with questions. But there was no time for answers. They had to move. Together, they ran into the unknown, hoping against hope that they could outrun the darkness closing in around them. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.